Welcome to the Commercial Property Podcast. My name is Suzi Carter. I am a chartered surveyor. I've been involved in commercial property in the UK for 30 years and I've done hundreds of commercial property deals. I'm here to be your guide through the commercial property market, whether you're an experienced investor or whether you're literally thinking about dipping your toe in the world of commercial real estate. I will be here talking to you about all kinds of things commercial real estate in the UK, and I've also got some fantastic guest experts who are joining me. So please do subscribe if you'd like to follow, and if you'd like any more help or information on commercial real estate, please do click www.suzicarter.com, which is my website, and you can find out all the ways I can help you. So stay tuned for this week's episode. So welcome back to the Commercial Property Podcast, and it's my great pleasure today to announce that I've got some guests joining me from London Rock Partners, who are specialists in hotels. It's Clare and Naveed. Welcome. Thanks for joining me.
Nice to see you. Thanks, Suzi.
Thanks, Suzi. Glad to be on board.
Great to have you here. So it doesn't take a rocket scientist to work, but today we're going to be talking all about hotels. And I was just saying to Clare and Naveed that it's an area in surveying. You know, I've got a corporate background. I've worked in for various corporate companies in surveying, but I've never dealt with hotels. So I'm really looking forward to this because it's an area that I've not really dealt with. So I'm really looking forward to being educated as well. So Clare and Naveed, could you just introduce London Rock Partners and yourselves in terms of what you do in the hotel space?
Yeah, of course, I'd love to. So we are London Rock Partners, and we are a white label hospitality management platform. So what that means is that wherever you are in the cycle of owning a hospitality asset, be it a hostel, a hotel, an apart hotel, long stay, us and our team can help you in driving, whether that be value, whether it be acquiring, exiting, developing, or indeed operating. So we work with lots of family offices, high net worth individuals, lenders, banks, funds who own hospitality assets but would like them to be performing better than they currently are. And that's when they come to us. And we have a team of people who live and breathe hospitality, live and breathe driving performance. And that's what we do for a living. What have I missed?
No, I think look, thank you for having us on board. Hotels are interesting because everyone has stayed in a hotel before. And a lot of people have stayed in like a 3-star, 4-star, 5-star. You stay at holiday. When you go to holidays, you stay in a hotel. So everyone has got a view on how hotels should be run or how hotels should be operating. And everyone says, oh, this is not right. But there are complexities when you have a business like hotel because you're dealing with lots of people. And look, we would love to talk you through more. So I'm sure you have lots of questions, but hotels, it's an interesting piece of business where it because everyone has stayed in one, so it makes it quite interesting. So we'd love to talk about it.
Perfect. Yeah, I can imagine there's lots of amateur experts out there you have to deal with. So yeah,
there's lots of opinions.
I'm sure. Yeah, absolutely. So let's just start with a little bit about the market. So we had COVID where everything was closed and hotels either had to pivot or close their doors, obviously, and the hospitality business was really hit. So kind of where are we now? What's happened since COVID and where do you see the market today?
I think do you want to take this?
No.
I think COVID was an interesting part of, for everyone, for all the businesses. It was very difficult. You had to close hotels. We'd never closed hotels before. We've never done it. And suddenly closing 25, 30 hotels overnight. But then, the hotels were also used for key workers. So, there was some business out there. I think things have changed in the last 5 years massively, where I think the current economic climate makes it a bit more harder to trade hotels to how it was during COVID. And you're just dealing with different set of circumstances. And I think hotel industry is one where you've always had something, before COVID, it was Brexit we were dealing with,
Yeah.
the impacts of Brexit, what's going to happen with the cost of eggs, wine, food, all those things. And before that, you had the crash of 2002, 2007, 2008. You had Olympics. So there's always something going on in hospitality. And it's a very resilient asset class.
Yeah.
I think we always come out on top of it, but there's always something going on in hotels.
Yeah, and I think it changed. I think it changed customers' expectations. So I think the whole period, if you think about it from a customer perspective, the whole period of COVID changed people's ideas of what staying in a hotel meant. Everyone's expectations went from here to here because everyone was doing very well at home. All of a sudden, you were cooking the best food, you were drinking the best wine, you were having that you were trying to recreate that kind of hotel experience at home. And I think what that's meant is that whilst it's advanced some kind of hotel tech angles, because we are getting better at automating processes, what it's done is hotel guests are far more appreciative now of the human element and the service element that they find in hotels. So I think it changed it from both ways. I think it changed it from an owner and investor perspective, and I think it changed it from a customer perception piece as well.
Yeah, fascinating. I have to say, I do find rude service and people not helping you at hotels actually unacceptable now. I do get that completely in terms
Yeah.
of that view. So does that mean that, given the market and given kind of customers' expectation, does that mean that there's very clear winners and losers in the market? So is there a kind of clear type of hotel that's kind of really coming out on top, or does it depend on different markets?
So I don't think, in my opinion, I don't think COVID is the factor that has changed that. I think because so much has happened since the hotels opened in 2021 to now 2025, in the way of how things have changed locally for UK. I think people have forgotten COVID and have got bigger challenges ahead. So that's in my opinion. I don't know if.
Yeah, no, I think there have been pressures that ironically are bigger than COVID in the last 2 years, because COVID was very black and white. You were either open or you were closed. Now everybody is open, but everyone has got bigger challenges around cost control, driving top line, managing
Yeah.
customer expectations. And I think when you talk about who's winning out of that, I think what COVID did was it really showed after COVID where the value was. And I think there will always be a place, and there's a really strong place in the market for that kind of high end luxury piece, which is very aspirational. But what I do think happened is that what would have been viewed as the economy market now has grown much bigger. And actually, there is a real appetite for really good, what would have been traditionally called economy product, because people want it to be functional, great location, but the expectation is that it's a little bit better than it used to be.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah, and I presume government policy is not particularly helping in terms of national insurance and minimum wage, and I presume that's hitting the sector quite significantly.
Yeah, and it has, and I think I guess taking the last 9 months, especially this calendar year, has been really hard for the hospitality sector. We've not really seen an increase in our turnover, but what we've seen is an increase in our costs, and which is obviously coming in the way of minimum wage, the national insurance going up, like you've said, and that's had an impact. And it's not just is that, inflation is still slightly high. The cost of utilities is still slightly higher than it was last year. So there are a lot of cost pressures still that exist, and which makes it harder for hotels.
And I think as an operator, the challenge is that those costs are out of your control. So you can be
Yeah.
really proactive. You can be really proactive and you can try and make tiny kind of indentations in them. But those have hit everybody across the board. And they are, we can't decide what those are going to be. And I think that's the challenge for operating in the market at the moment.
Yeah, for sure. That makes perfect sense. And I suppose presume that's where asset management companies like yours come in, because obviously you can help squeeze the pips out of the assets. But we'll talk about that in a second. And just briefly before we go on to that, there will be people listening here that won't know how hotels are valued, because they're valued slightly differently very differently than a lot of commercial assets. Could you just give us a little bit of an overview over how that works, start from basics if you can, so that people understand it, because obviously it's important in terms of the turnover and the performance of the hotel in terms of the valuations.
Susie, I think you've summed it up and you've answered it really, really well. That is the answer. It is based on turnover and performance. Not so much turnover, but it's more based on EBITDA of the hotel, and it's what that hotel is generating. It depends on the location. London obviously is a lot of investors that come into the UK or want to buy hotels in London. It could be because it's a trophy asset. Whereas, if you're an institutional investor, your criteria might be slightly different. So, but hotels are generally valued on its EBITDA performance. But there are exceptions. If you are picking up a trophy asset, which could be the Ritz, for example, I'm sure it would not be valued on its performance, but it gets valued because it's the Ritz. So there are some exceptions out there. But generally it comes down to performance.
Yeah, and there are some things that can enhance that and drive that. Like Naveed said, location, brand, facilities. There are other elements that can really drive, land value, that could really support that.
Yeah, that makes sense. Okay, great. So talk us through kind of what you do in hotels. So how can you kind of, if you were called into a hotel that maybe isn't performing, kind of what do you look at to try and kind of pivot into kind of making it more successful?
Well, I think first of all, it doesn't happen particularly quickly, Susie. Let's just manage expectations for everybody. Look, I think when we are engaged with by a hotel owner, we have to go into kind of like a triage process, and you have to very quickly understand what the drivers are for that particular hotel and where the challenges are. And for us, that normally starts with people. Hospitality is run by people for people. If you get the people right, particularly the leadership right, we know that everything else becomes a much easier journey and a much easier task. So I think for us, it's really understanding, before we get into the weeds of the P&L account and understanding everything like that, we really get into structure of people, who does what, how the hotel feels, how it looks, and what that leadership team think is important.
Yeah, no, 100% agree. I think it's very easy to walk into a business and give your high level overview based on a spreadsheet. Anybody could do that, right?
Yeah.
I think for us, where we're slightly different is that if we like to understand the day to day of what is driving the decline in a business. And so for us, it's usually quite key to understand the dynamics of the team, of the structure, and once you get your head around people, and then things can be much easier. Then it's easier to put a process in. It's easier to have the discipline of what needs to be done if you have the right people. I think a lot of time we find is that it's you could take on really big hotel businesses, and maybe sometimes it's just as simple as the leadership isn't right. And that usually comes down to one or two individuals, and that could be a turnover of that those staff could be about 100 to 200 staff, but if you make one small change, that impacts that massively. So there's a lot of things like Claire said, but usually it starts with the people piece.
And I think quite often, just on that people piece, I think quite often what we find is that there isn't an understanding of what good performance looks like. So everyone's got different expectations, and no one's been particularly clear about what they want. I think for us, talking the whole team through performance, what it looks like, why the expectation is what it is, how the market's performing, how they can support and influence that makes a big difference. Because once they feel involved in that journey, then all of a sudden they understand their contribution. And quite often we find that that's just not been an important part of their culture previously, which to us is really important.
Yeah, fascinating. No, that's really interesting. Probably the only area of property where you really focus on the people, which is fascinating. In terms of so you sort the people out, or you get some structures in place with people. What else do you look for?
So our second part is looking at the financial performance of the business ultimately, because that's what we're employed to do, and it usually starts with, what is the turnover like, how can you improve the turnover, and because our approach is slightly, and it's also case by case basis. I have to clarify that because sometimes you walk into businesses and they could be really cost heavy businesses. So, but then majority of the businesses that we walk into are in hotels. They're not cost heavy, and they are mainly where the businesses are struggling with turnover because it could be because a hotel has opened 2 miles down the road and suddenly they've lost loads of market share. And how do you revitalize the team? How do you hunt differently?
Yeah.
Right? It's the same team, but they just need a different direction. And that's where we come in because we worked across so many different locations in the UK. We're not involved, as in, we're not at the day to day, but we have a very holistic approach and view to run a business. And I think is how do you install that into a team and how to get them
Hungry.
exactly.
How do you make the team hungry to perform? And I'm not going to say it's easy because that's not the wrong words are going to come out. But the easier approach would just be to slash costs throughout the account. That would be the easy option. The harder option, but the more sustainable option, is to drive revenue performance. And that is our kind of like driving force in everything, is that if we can get top line revenue performance heading in the right direction, everything else becomes far easier to manage. And that's certainly where our focus has and is.
Yeah, perfect. Okay, no, that makes perfect sense. And other kind of, and I presume that some businesses are then looking to just run longer term. Is there a kind of roll up model that businesses are looking at where they try and get their performance up to sell, or kind of, and typically how long might that take in terms of improving performance? You said, Claire, it takes quite a long time to.
Yeah, this is like how long's a piece of string?
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. And I'm kind of slightly putting you on the spot there, but how long does this stuff take, and what's the end objective of a lot of people? Is, I presume it's the different, sale or carrying on or refinance or whatever, but kind of other in general themes around that.
I think I think again you've answered it, most of it. It's different drivers, and the drivers are better performances because maybe sometimes they do want to refinance. You're right. Sometimes the plan is to exit, but a lot of what we do with family offices is some of the businesses that we work with, the hotels has been carried down to maybe the third generation now, and is to get the business to perform at its best,
At its optimum.
yeah, exactly. So but the drivers are different, and how long does it take to turn around a business? I love to say it takes a few months, but it doesn't. And it doesn't take 3 months. It doesn't take 6 months. I think, in my opinion, or in my experience, it takes a year to put everything in,
Yeah.
and where you've gone through the people process, and then and the following year is when you start to see a change. So it takes a good 2 years before you can actually see a good turnaround and you can see results.
Yeah, and I think that part of our job is to be really open and transparent about that, right? When we meet owners or potential investors, we have to be really clear. It definitely takes us a good 6 months to understand a business in as much detail as we need to do to understand where are the levers and how we can fix it. 4 months in, we do not know all the answers. 6 months in, we're beginning to understand what makes it tick. And then you go through a period of change, and then you've got to start ramping up performance. So I would say it's definitely 18 months to 24 months until you really start to reap the rewards, because even if you just think about it, to link it to our previous point about driving top line, so where we focus our attention is driving sales, some of those sales that we're driving won't be until next year, so you won't see the fruits of your labor until next year. So you really need that cycle to be able to see whether or not it's worked.
Yeah, no, that makes perfect sense. It's so difficult to increased turnover when you're going through a period of flux and change, isn't it? I
Yeah.
totally get that. Yeah. So in terms of I'm just looking at my briefing notes on our chat, and I think you guys made the comment that it's never been a better time to focus on this kind of avenue in terms of hotel asset management and hotels for investment in the current climate. Kind of why do you think that is, and kind of where do you think the opportunities are for investors in this space?
I think it's an opportunity because, as things get harder, a lot of, there were UK's got loads of hotels, and there are a lot of investors or single site, especially single site owners, which, because it's been through different generations in their family, will look to exit or are looking to exit and are actively doing it. And that's where it's a great opportunity for investors to partner up with somebody like a hotel management company like us, which is, we understand the market, we understand, what it takes to turn around a business, what is the value upside, how can you redevelop, reposition a hotel, and that's where the opportunity is, and ultimately increase the value of the business. So we think it's a great time to do it.
Yeah.
And the circumstances are great because when things get hard, a lot of people do sell, and that's the perfect time to buy.
Yeah. And I think a lot of the kind of hotels or assets that Naveed is talking about require significant investment, right? That they need to have, and you've either got that hunger and that desire to play the long game and invest and then see the fruits and then see the enhanced value, or you haven't. And I think there is a feeling at the moment in the market that there are some really key locations with underinvested assets that, given the right framework and the right branding or the right management, could be phenomenal.
Yeah, Susie, I was reading a report, and this was earlier probably in the first half of the year, that a lot of the transactions that were currently being done in the UK hotel market were cash transactions.
Yeah.
Means that if you see an opportunity, you're quick to act. You're not going via the bank funding route. You're just, whether it's 10 million or 20 million, you're just paying that within 3 months, 6 months, and you're just buying it cash. It's because people see an opportunity, because they know they can rebrand, reposition the things that Claire's mentioned, and you can have an upside in 5 years. So it's a great time to invest in hotels.
Yeah. No, I mean, absolutely. And motivated vendors want speed and certainty, don't they? So that's where the cash comes in for sure. No, I totally get that. So you mentioned key locations. Like, what, you don't need to tell me where they are necessarily, or you can do, but in terms of kind of what makes a really great location for a hotel, and how do you, when you're advising, how do you advise an owner or maybe a developer or an investor in terms of, say they've got a high-end hotel in what you think should be a budget location, kind of how does can you pivot that kind of thing, or how do you kind of advise from that perspective?
I'm only laughing,
Sorry,
Susie, because the second one. The reason I'm laughing is because we've definitely had that conversation on more than one occasion.
Okay, right.
Look, I think outside key cities will always be great locations, right? Outside of those key cities, and by that I mean London, Manchester, Edinburgh, Bath, Oxford, Cambridge. Outside of that, and those are locations where you are paying a premium for the location. So it would be unusual to find a hotel in one of those locations and think, okay, this is an absolute, there's massive value or there's massive upside, because the location is what's driving the price. However, outside of those city locations, I think what you look for is multiple revenue opportunities, because unless you are in central London, you are not going to be filled 98% of the time by one single revenue stream. You've got to look at multiple things. So you've got to look for a location that has got good corporate, good transport links, has got leisure opportunity. Maybe it's doing weddings, maybe it's got an opportunity to do spa. You've got to start being able to layer on the different revenue incomes to kind of support that all year round trading piece.
Yeah. Oh, no,
Yeah,
no. I think Claire, you've covered. I think Sue Claire's covered. The main cities are for example, everybody, like I say, everybody does want to buy a hotel in London.
Yeah.
London's got a draw, it's got a pull, and after London in the UK is Edinburgh, because it's the inbound travel is 365 days a year. Um, you know, hotels are trading businesses. You generate cash every day.
Yeah.
And if you have got people coming in every day, everyone's, it just makes it more attractive that, okay, I've got a busy hotel every day, and I can sell all the rooms. Then usually that's what those are the key cities. York is good, Cambridge is good, Manchester's good, Liverpool's good, because there's so many demand drivers in all these
Yeah.
locations. In Manchester, you've got the football club, you've got a great city that brings loads of leisure in. Liverpool is exactly the same. York is exactly the same. Cambridge is exactly the same. Oxford is the same. So there are plenty of places in the UK which are really amazing for hotels.
yeah. And I was trying to get a hotel for half term, and we left it very late. Everyone else in the UK was much more organised than we were, and believe me, I definitely realised that. I mean, they were all booked up in Oxford, Cambridge, places. It was remarkable,
Yeah.
actually.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And that's
interesting.
not to say, that's not to say that those other, what we would call, regional locations aren't just as good. You've just got to understand the demographic that you're talking to locally and nationally, and you've got to understand who else has got hotels in the area, because that's the best sign of how trading is. Are there any other brands? How is the competitor set performing, and what are the drivers, and how can you steal them?
Yeah, yeah, no, absolutely. And in terms of, so if you were advising a new hotel investor, so somebody wanted to come into the market for the first time, whether it's family office or whether it's individual or whoever really, um, kind of where would you start, branded versus independent? Obviously, we've talked about locations, but I mean, obviously, it's down to their key investment criteria too, to some degree. But kind of, how would you start to advise new investors?
See, I think it's not a straightforward one because this is quite subjective to a lot of people's opinion,
Mm,
and I have an opinion which is based on an operator's opinion, like the day to day. A valuer will have a different opinion, a bank will have a different opinion, and the guy who's actually wants to buy it has stayed somewhere and has got a very different opinion. So it's for us, I usually, and again, this is over the last 5 years, the work that we've done with various investors is we always say keep it simple and be risk adverse
For the
on
first one,
for the
yeah.
first one, because you
mm,
have to get your first one right. And if you don't get your first one right, you won't have the confidence to do your second one. Why would you do it?
Yeah.
And you won't do your third one. So for the first one, usually we do say is keep the business model or the operating model straightforward. By straightforward, I mean you don't need to have fancy Michelin star restaurants on your first outing. Get to understand the trade, get to understand how hotels operate. So it could be having something a straightforward, and there's some great brands out there.
Yeah.
For example, Hilton, Marriott. They will, there are brands in the family of Hilton and Marriott that give you, for example, a Hampton by Hilton or a Moxie. There's some good brands that are fairly straightforward operating model, and you get to understand how hospitality works. And I think once you nail that as your first one, then is right to go and do a second one, which is slightly more complex, different revenue streams. That's what I recommend, but I'm sure everyone's got an opinion on this.
And I think the joy of going with a branded option in the early days is that I hate to say it, but there's quite a lot of rules. And
mm,
if it's your first investment, particularly of this scale and in this sector, what you need is some real parameters so that you understand how you benchmark against other hotels that are sitting that brand, but also there is a really good process that you have to go through as an owner and start to understand performance. And their key metrics are much easier to understand than perhaps an independent hotel. So I think it gives a bit more structure to the process. And it's a really good way of understanding, particularly a very bedroom orientated market, is working with a brand, because the insight that you'll get would be more than if you were solo.
Yeah, yeah. And can you be a hands-off investor if you're a hotel investor, or do you have to roll your sleeves up and kind of get in the weeds?
I think it's a combination. It is a combination, and I think how we work with a lot of different investors is it's a collaboration, and it's when it comes to decision making, if you that ideas around the table, it only helps. It's how we look at it, at
Yeah.
least. But I'm sure, again, you know, maybe different operators will look at it slightly differently. But if you're collaborating, usually the results are much better.
Yeah, and I think like even just from a common sense approach, if we're talking about owner A, if he had the same skill set as us, then he would be doing what we were doing, right? And if we had the same skill set, then we'd be doing what he was doing. Everyone brings something different to the table. I think as long as you're really clear from the onset about what everyone is good at and where you need support. So, for, a good example for us might be if we were talking about extending a hotel or talking about planning or talking about, we think if we did this, we could generate this much extra revenue. Those kind of conversations you need to have with an owner or an investor because they've got they might have a completely different return model for one. They might have a completely different idea and they will bring to it that developer investor angle, whereas we are operators. And you need that mix, but as long as you're really clear from the start of who does what, it's good. And we've seen real benefit from working really closely with owners, investors on specific hotel projects.
Yeah, no, that definitely makes perfect sense. And so I'd love to talk about apart hotels because it's not a new model, but it's something that's growing in the UK. From my perception, I know some operators of apart hotels as well. How does the model differ from your traditional hotel? And kind of what are your observations on what's happening in that market?
I think you rightly said it's taken a while it's taken a while to get this in the UK market because it was very much an American thing, right? And it's probably in the last 5-6 years where you're starting to see more and more apart hotels coming into the market. And I think where it differs massively with hotels is the length of stay. In a hotel, you'll probably stay typical for a night or 2 nights. But what apart hotels give you is, the length of stay, and it could be from a week to 2 weeks to 3 weeks. And why is it an interesting asset class for investors is because, if you're staying there for 2 weeks, the cost of turning around the room, cost of labor, cost of food and beverage, everything is much lower because it is pretty much your home away from home. Right. So say and the return and the profit conversion is much more attractive than just a traditional hotel. So that's why a lot of brands and that's why a lot of investors are looking into apart hotel. But we got to remember the complex. There are also complexities on apart hotel schemes. Where's the size of the room? If you are going to be it's a home away from home, it just can't be a traditional hotel bedroom, which could be 12 to 14 square meters. It has to be double the size. You got to have a small kitchenette. It got to feel like home. But yeah, we love it because it's.
And I think that when global brands start coming into a new space, that's when you know that this has really got opportunity, and all of the major brands are now playing in this kind of apart hotel arena. I think what's interesting is what we've seen and what we come across now is people very much looking at mixed use schemes where they'll take a building, let's say 100 rooms, and they will do some apart hotel rooms and some hotel rooms, and that just gives them the flexibility. It's almost like a safer way to do it, less risk attached, because you've then got the ability to use all of that stock as hotel rooms or indeed flex it and play to a very different guest. You might have, guest A is in your apart hotel room for 2 weeks because he's either on an induction plan, somewhere is relocating. It could be anything. But, in room B, just below, you've got that churn of that kind of daily transient guest. So I think that's where people are being clever with schemes, is looking at having the flexibility of all under the same brand umbrella, perhaps, but having long stay and hotel rooms all in the same complex.
This episode is brought to you by Bond Finance Limited. your trusted partner for commercial property mortgage solutions. Are you an experienced residential property investor about to diversify into commercial property, looking for funding options? Bond Finance can help. Whether you're planning to expand, refinance, or make a major property investment, Bond Finance provides expert advice with access to a wide range of lenders, from high street to specialist. Book a free discovery session today to explore how we can tailor commercial funding solutions to your unique investment strategy. Visit www.bondfinanceltd.co.uk and take the next step in your commercial finance journey.
Yeah, super interesting. And I've got clients who have maybe got a ground floor classy unit with an old office above, and that seems to be quite an attractive target for repurposing. Are you kind of looking at any of that kind of thing?
Yeah, so we do a lot, and especially a lot of what we do is, and interestingly, that's in the key cities,
Yeah.
because that's where a lot of the demand is, and it's in different pockets of London, and it's Edinburgh, or it's in Manchester, but Claire's rightly pointed out, it's mixed use, and it's half an apart hotel, half a hotel, a bit of retail. Just makes it a perfect investment.
And I think the main driver in what you're talking about, repurposing office space, is exactly that. Over the last 5 years, the cost of development and the cost of build has exponentially increased. So everybody is looking at repurposing, which is why those office buildings, which are now vacant, are all of a sudden so attractive, because the shell is there, as opposed to starting from scratch. So I think that's what's driving that piece of the market.
Yeah, fantastic use for those secondhand,
Yes.
redundant office buildings, isn't it? Fantastic.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I presume that you can advise, because I've got lots of clients in that space, and also I know lots of people listening will have buildings like that or be looking at buildings like that. So I presume that if somebody is looking at a building like that, you can sit alongside them and advise them what kind of hotel, apart hotel, that they should put in that, and how they would structure it.
Absolutely.
Yeah, perfect. Okay, great. Well, I mean, as I said at the beginning, hotel is a sector I've never worked in before, and so I've definitely learned a lot today. Where do you see, get your crystal ball out. We all try and predict the future, but where do you see the market kind of going? Do you think there's going to be consolidation? Do you think? I mean, we're definitely predicting a bit of a downturn at some point. So, how do we think that will affect the hotel market, and what can investors and operators do to try and be bulletproof in those kind of times? Where do you see the market going?
I think there's always, I think if last 10 years to last, maybe, 10 years, there's always been headlines, there's always a downturn coming, right? That's a fact. And there's always a recession. Then, suddenly there's something happens in America, there's a news on tariffs, and suddenly the market goes down. I think everyone's got a bit used to it.
Yeah.
But I think how we run our businesses, at least, is you got to prepare for the unexpected. You got to prepare for next year's budget. You got to think about how do you drive new revenue streams in your business.
Yeah.
You got to stay creative. You got to offer the best service. You got to be the best hotel out there. You got to have the best team. You got to have the best product.
You got to be the best employer.
Yeah, you got to be the best employer of choice in the local area. And I think if you are ticking all of those boxes, then I think your life is slightly easier compared to the rest, because we run a lot of hotels where we are rated number one in that area, and people just come back to us. Doesn't matter if you're £20 expensive or £30 expensive, because they know the team is really good and the food is really amazing. And we can charge a premium for that. And people do come back to us for that. I think it's, there will be costs, the costs will be increasing, but, they've increased for the last 10 years. and that's how it's always going to be. You just have to adapt to it.
I think that hospitality is resilient. It has always been resilient. It came through a global pandemic, and most of us are still here, still operating, still talking about how do we eke a bit more out of it. And I think what hasn't changed is the appetite to invest in the UK. We are really busy talking to people who really want to invest in UK hospitality. And that is really encouraging. That shows you that, and these are not all people who are looking for vanity projects, and they're not all people that are only looking at central London. They are people who are looking at showing really good value on an investment base in the UK. So that's all good news. I think you've just got to constantly be thinking about how do I do better next year? How do I stay on top? And looking at inbound markets is a really good example. London is hugely affected by changes in the US, China, Asia, travel kind of consensus and travel rules. You've always got to have another market to go to, and that's why when we talked about looking at those regional UK hotels and having as many things coming into the funnel as possible. That's what you've got to stay focused on, and then by default you become more resilient, I think.
Yeah. So location's important, but operation is more important, really.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah, and I presume lease length of operators is really attractive to investors as well, because I'm making a presumption here, but I presume that leases are longer because of the investment that's needed from operators.
I think lease models is very much a Western Europe concept, and it's really not taken off in the UK massively. And Travelodge and Premier Inns are really good at that, and giving their investors that lease opportunity. But generally outside of Premier Inn and Travelodge, they're quite less around. But I think it's what gives what gives investors confidence is if you've got an operator like us on board who actually understands the location, have done it before, then you have got independent valuers who will underwrite what we would say, and then you also have to, if they're going through the banks and there's been proper due diligence on something, it just gives everybody that confidence that it's a good investment. It's not just us saying it, as a lot of other people saying it also, that it's a good investment, then you should do it.
Yeah, no, great. Well, I've definitely learned a lot today. Thank you so much for joining me. Would you like to tell the listeners how they can get hold of you? And you've given us this kind of range of the services, but it might just be recapping kind of what you do.
Yes, so the best place to look for us is our website, which is londonrockpartners.com. And there you can see our current client list, and you can see kind of the key things that we do for a living. But really, wherever you are in the cycle of owning, wanting to own, or indeed disposing or trading a hospitality asset, we can definitely help. We have a wide range of clients, and we are definitely a more bespoke approach and a tailored approach to hospitality management than perhaps some of the bigger companies in the same space.
Yeah, great, excellent. And we'll share everything in the show notes as well, so that people get hold of you. So thank you so much. It's been an absolute pleasure having you both on the show. As I say, I've learned a lot. I know a lot more about hotels than I did at the beginning of this chat, which is great.
Good.
And yeah, I'm sure that everybody has found this super interesting. So yeah, thank you so much for joining me.
Lovely. Thanks so much, Suzi.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.